My name is Matthew, and for as long as I can recall, I have devoted my life to helping others. Being a paramedic was not merely a job for me, it was a calling. I had witnessed people at their most vulnerable, teetering between life and death, and I spent years trying to pull them back, doing everything I could to give them another chance. Some days were exhausting. The long hours, the adrenaline-charged calls, and the moments where I wasn't sure if the person in front of me would survive. But even on the toughest days, I knew one thing for certain. I was making a difference. I had lost track of how many people I had treated over the years, how many hands I had held as someone took their final breath, how many families I had comforted when the worst had happened. It never got easier, no matter how many times I faced it. Death was always heavy. Yet there was always a question in the back of my mind. Why did some people survive while others didn't? I had seen patients miraculously recover when the odds were against them, and I had witnessed others slip away even when everything was done perfectly. I believed in God, I always had, but I didn't always understand his ways. I never doubted that he existed, but I often wondered how he decided who lived and who died. Did he intervene, stepping in at the last moment for some but not for others? Or was it simply random? I tried not to dwell on it too much, telling myself it wasn't for me to understand. My job was to do my part, to fight for every life and to trust that whatever happened was beyond my control. But I never imagined that one day I would be the one lying there, on the edge of life and death. It started like any other shift, a normal night, a routine call. The radio crackled as we sped through the streets, sirens blaring, heading toward an accident scene. It wasn't unusual. We had responded to hundreds of crashes before, and each time it was a race against time. We had to get there, stabilize the patient, and transport them before it was too late. I sat in the passenger seat, running through protocols in my head, mentally preparing for whatever we were about to face. My partner was focused on the road, maneuvering through traffic as best as he could. We were almost there, just a few more blocks, and then, in an instant, everything changed. A blinding set of headlights rushed toward us from the side. I barely had time to process what was happening before the impact. The ambulance jolted violently, the sound of metal crushing against metal filling my ears. My body was thrown forward as the collision sent us spinning. The weightlessness lasted only a moment before everything came crashing down. I felt it before I understood it. The crushing pain, the suffocating pressure, the unbearable silence. And then nothing. Everything went black. I don't know how much time passed. It could have been seconds, minutes, or hours. But when I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the ambulance anymore. At first, I thought I was dreaming. I was standing, but there was no pain. No injuries. The weight of my body, the pressure of the accident, all of it was gone. The world around me wasn't the same. The street, the wreckage, the flashing lights of emergency vehicles, they were all far away, muted, distant. I turned my head, and what I saw next made my breath catch in my throat. I was looking down at myself. My body was still in the ambulance, crumpled and lifeless. My fellow paramedics were there, desperately trying to save me. I saw my partner calling my name, shaking me, his voice frantic. I should have felt panic. I should have felt fear. But I didn't. I felt peace, a peace so deep, so consuming, that it didn't make sense. I wasn't in my body anymore, and for the first time I understood. I was dead, but that wasn't the end. Something or someone was coming. And in that moment I knew my questions were finally going to be answered. I felt weightless, as if I was floating in a space where gravity no longer held me. The crushing pain I had felt moments before was gone, replaced by an overwhelming sense of calm. My battered body inside the ambulance no longer felt real to me. It was as if I was existing, not as flesh and bone, but as something else entirely. I should have been afraid. I should have been trying to make sense of what was happening. But strangely, I wasn't. There was no panic, no struggle, just a quiet knowing that something beyond my understanding was unfolding. I looked down and saw the wreckage. The ambulance was barely recognizable, crumpled against another vehicle. The scene was chaotic. Flashing red and blue lights filled the night, casting shadows over the twisted metal and broken glass. My partner was moving frantically, his hands pressing down on my chest, shouting my name. I could hear him, but his voice sounded distant, like an echo carried by the wind. Other first responders had arrived, paramedics and firefighters rushing to the scene, their faces tense with urgency. Then I saw myself lying there, motionless, eyes closed. My body looked so small, so fragile. It was unsettling. Yet, at the same time, I felt detached from it. That body was me, but it wasn't me. I wasn't inside it anymore. I was here, watching from above, seeing everything unfold in a way that defied logic. Time felt strange, like it wasn't moving at the same speed as before. The world below me continued, but I felt separate from it, no longer bound by the same rules that had governed my existence. I should have been terrified, but I wasn't. Instead, there was a profound sense of peace washing over me, something I had never felt before. It wasn't just the absence of pain or fear, it was something much deeper. Then something changed. A light appeared, not in front of me nor behind me, but all around me. It wasn't like any light I had ever seen. It wasn't blinding or harsh, but soft and alive, as if it had its own presence. It didn't just illuminate. It pulled me in, not forcefully, but with a gentle, undeniable invitation. The more I looked at it, the more I felt an indescribable warmth, a love so pure that it made everything else fade away. I knew I was meant to go toward it. It wasn't just a thought, it was a truth that settled deep inside me, more real than anything I had ever known. There was no hesitation, no doubt. My entire being was drawn to it, as if I had always belonged there but had somehow forgotten until this moment. As I drifted toward the light, something inside me shifted. A realization settled over me with complete clarity. I was dead. The life I had known, the long shifts in the ambulance, the calls in the middle of the night, the moments of triumph when we saved someone, and the heartbreak when we couldn't. All of it was over. The questions I had carried for so long about life and death, about who got to survive and who didn't, were no longer distant thoughts in the back of my mind. Now I was experiencing the very thing I had spent years witnessing in others. But unlike anything I had ever imagined, death wasn't darkness. It wasn't emptiness. It wasn't something to fear. It was leading me somewhere. And I knew, without a doubt, that I was about to understand everything in a way I never could before. I was leaving the world I had known, but I wasn't lost. I wasn't alone. Something or someone was waiting for me on the other side of that light. And as I moved toward it, I knew I was about to find out the truth I had always wondered about. As I moved toward the light, everything around me seemed to dissolve, yet I wasn't afraid. The sense of peace only grew stronger, wrapping around me like the most comforting embrace I had ever known. There was no weight on my shoulders, no ache in my body, no lingering fear of what had just happened. It felt as if I had been freed from something I hadn't even realized had been holding me down my whole life. Then the light shifted. It wasn't just brightness anymore. It had depth, presence, something beyond what I could comprehend. And then, in the midst of it, I saw him. I didn't need to be told who he was. There was no introduction, no explanation. I just knew. Jesus stood before me. And in that moment, every thought I had ever had about him, every story I had read, every sermon I had listened to, every mental image I had formed in my mind faded into insignificance. This was not just the figure from paintings, not just a historical teacher, not just a religious concept. He was real. He was alive. He was more powerful than I had ever imagined. And yet there was no intimidation, no fear, only a love so overwhelming that I felt like I might fall to my knees under its weight. He didn't speak right away, but he didn't need to. The moment our eyes met, I felt everything. It was as if every single moment of my life was suddenly laid bare, not just the things I had done, but the intentions behind them, the hidden thoughts no one else had ever known, the questions I had never spoken aloud. Every moment of doubt, every silent prayer, every time I had wondered why some people lived and others didn't, why I had witnessed so much suffering, why I had spent my life trying to save people only to find myself in this place. Now, it was all there. I should have felt ashamed, knowing that every part of me was exposed, that he could see the doubts I had carried, the moments I had questioned his plan, the times I had let my faith slip into routine instead of true devotion. But I didn't. There was no condemnation in his gaze, no disappointment, no anger, only love, a love so deep, so full, so complete, that it shattered every fear, every insecurity, every lingering hesitation inside me. I wanted to speak, to tell him how much I had believed in him, how I had tried my best to be a good person, how I had struggled to understand his ways. But before I could say a word, he spoke first. "There is something I need to show you." The moment he said it, I felt something shift around me. The light. I didn't vanish, but suddenly, I wasn't just standing in front of him anymore. Something was shifting, something beyond my comprehension, something I felt was about to unveil the truth I had always longed for. As Jesus extended his hand, I realized that whatever he was about to show me would transform everything. The moment he reached out, everything around me changed. The glowing light that had enveloped me didn't disappear, but I was no longer standing still. It felt as if I were being moved, though I wasn't walking. I didn't feel wind or movement, but I knew I was traveling to a place beyond anything I had ever known. Then the scene unfolded before me, and I realized that Jesus was showing me the world, but not as I had always seen it. It wasn't just the earth in a physical sense. I was perceiving something deeper, more profound. It was as if I could see beyond what people showed on the outside, past their words and actions, into the very state of their souls. I saw people everywhere, walking, working, scrolling through their phones, chasing careers, success, money, approval, entertainment. They moved so fast, so blindly, as if nothing beyond their daily tasks existed. Some were obsessed with accumulating wealth, thinking they had all the time in the world to consider the deeper matters later. Others were consumed by distractions, social media, TV, gossip, endless plans for the future, without a thought for eternity. Then I saw something even more disturbing. I saw churches, some grand and full of people, others small and humble. At first, it seemed people were worshiping, praying, and dedicating themselves to God, but upon closer inspection, I saw countless hearts that were distant from Him. Their lips moved in prayer, but their minds were elsewhere. They listened to sermons, but their hearts remained unchanged. Some attended out of habit, going through the motions as if ticking off a to-do list. Others were there for appearances, making sure they were seen as good Christians. But the moment they left, they returned to lives that had nothing to do with God. Even some pastors, those meant to lead and shepherd the people, had lost sight of their calling. Some focused on expanding their influence rather than growing the faith of their people. Others diluted the truth, telling people what they wanted to hear rather than what they needed to hear. There were still a few who were sincere, whose love for God was pure, but they were fewer than I had expected. Jesus stood beside me, watching everything unfold. Then he spoke, and his words carried such weight that they sank deep into my soul. "They believe they have time, but they do not seek me," he said. The moment he spoke, I understood. People thought they had control over their lives. They believed they could push God aside until it was more convenient, that they could turn to Him later, when they were older, when life slowed down, when they had finished everything else they wanted to do. They assumed there would always be another day, another chance, another moment. But I had been a paramedic, and I had witnessed how quickly life could be taken away. I had held the hands of people who had no idea that their day was their last. I had heard final words from those who thought they had years left but had only minutes. And yet, I had never fully grasped the urgency of it all until now. I thought about my own life, about all the times I prayed, went to church, and tried to do good deeds. But had I truly prioritized God? Had I given him everything or just what was convenient? I had spent my life saving people physically, but had I ever stopped to think about saving them spiritually? Had I ever told them that this world was temporary and that what came after truly mattered? Had I lived in a way that pointed others to Jesus, or had I only focused on the here and now? I had believed in God and prayed, but I had also been distracted, caught up in my responsibilities, routines, and my own concerns about what mattered. Now, standing beside Jesus and seeing the world as he saw it, I realized how much people were missing the point. It wasn't just about going to church or saying you believed. It wasn't about following religious habits without true surrender. It was about truly seeking him. As I looked at Jesus, I saw something in his eyes that broke me even more. He wasn't angry. He was heartbroken because he loved every single one of them, and so many of them didn't even realize how much they needed him. I turned to him, my voice barely above a whisper. "What happens to them?" I asked. He looked at me, and though sadness filled his expression, there was also hope. "That is why I brought you here," he said. "There is still time, but they must choose me." In that moment, I knew that whatever Jesus was about to show me next would change everything. As I stood beside Jesus, watching the world continue on as if nothing had changed, I felt the weight of something pressing down on me. It wasn't fear or regret. It was urgency, a sense that something had to be done, that people had to wake up before it was too late. Jesus turned to me, his eyes filled with both love and sorrow, and for the first time I truly understood that believing in God wasn't enough. It had never been enough. I had spent my life believing in him, acknowledging his existence, and praying when I needed strength. But had I truly followed him? Had I truly sought him? I had called myself a Christian, but I had lived so much of my life on autopilot, assuming that because I wasn't doing anything wrong, I must be doing enough. But was I? Jesus didn't wait for me to speak. He didn't need to. He already knew what was in my heart. "It is not enough to believe," he said. "They must follow me." His words hit me like a wave, crashing into everything I had ever thought about faith. I had always assumed that as long as I believed in God and tried to be a good person, I was on the right path. But now I saw it. Faith wasn't passive. It wasn't just something you agreed with. It was something you lived. Jesus raised his hand again, and suddenly I saw visions of lives being wasted, not in obvious sin, but in something far more dangerous: distraction. I saw people going to church out of habit, but never opening their Bibles at home. I saw people praying when they were in trouble, but forgetting about God when things were good. I saw people serving in ministries, doing good things, but never actually spending time with Jesus. Then I saw something even more heartbreaking. I saw people who thought they had time. I saw a man who always told himself he would get serious about his faith later, but later never came. I saw a woman who spent her life focused on her career, promising herself she would make time for God, but that time never arrived. I saw entire families too busy, too distracted, too consumed by their daily lives to realize they were missing the most important thing. And then I saw myself. I saw all the years I spent saving lives physically, but never stopping to think if I had done enough to help save them spiritually. I had rescued people from accidents, heart attacks, overdoses, and disasters, but had I ever told them that their eternal life was what mattered most? Had I ever shared the truth that without Jesus, they had no hope beyond this life? The weight of it all crushed me. How many opportunities had I missed? How many people had I helped, only to send them back into the world without ever making sure they knew the one who could save their souls. Jesus' voice broke through my thoughts, calm but firm. They must stop delaying their faith. They must live for me now. I felt those words settle deep within my spirit, and I knew they weren't just meant for the people I had seen. They were meant for me, too. Jesus wasn't telling me this to condemn me. He was giving me a second chance, a chance to change, a chance to make sure that if I ever returned, I would never waste another moment living passively. Faith wasn't about checking a box or being a good person. It wasn't about just going to church or saying the right things. It was about choosing Jesus every single day above everything else. It was about truly following him, not just when it was easy, not just when I had time, but in every moment. I looked at Jesus, my heart pounding. "What do I do?" I asked. He looked at me with a love so deep it almost broke me, and he said, "You must go back. You must tell them." I didn't know how or who would listen, but I knew one thing for certain. If I was given the chance to return, I would never live the same way again. Everything around me shifted once more, and suddenly the weight of the world, the distractions, the wasted time, the people living unaware of what truly mattered, was gone. In its place, something else unfolded before me, something so overwhelming, so beyond anything I had ever experienced, that for a moment I forgot everything else. I was standing in a place that human words could never fully capture. It wasn't just beautiful, it was alive. Every color was more vibrant, every sound more pure, every breath filled with something I had never felt before. It wasn't just light surrounding me, it was love itself, a presence so deep and all-encompassing that I felt like I was finally home, as if this was where I had always belonged, but had somehow forgotten. The air carried peace, not just the absence of pain or stress, but a perfect, consuming peace. A peace I had never known, not even in my happiest moments on earth. There was no fear, no sadness, no lingering regrets. Every burden, every question, every doubt I had ever carried was gone, replaced by a joy so profound that I thought my heart might burst from it. And then I saw them. People, countless people. They weren't just standing there. They were alive in a way I had never seen before. Their faces shone, their eyes filled with a light so pure, it was almost too much to take in. And the love between them, the unity, the joy. It was unlike anything I had ever witnessed on earth. There was no division, no struggle, no worry. They weren't rushing, they weren't stressed, they weren't trying to be anything. They were simply with God, and that was enough. Some were singing, their voices blending in a harmony so breathtaking that it didn't just fill the air. It filled my very being. Others were laughing, embracing, talking, their faces radiant with a peace that made them ageless, as if time itself no longer had any hold on them. But it wasn't just their joy that overwhelmed me. It was why they were there. These were the ones who had truly followed God, the ones who had surrendered everything, their hearts, their plans, their lives to Him. They had chosen faith over fear, love over selfishness, obedience over convenience. They had not just believed in God, they had lived for Him. And now they were experiencing what He had promised all along. Jesus stood beside me, watching as I took it all in. I turned to Him, my voice trembling, barely able to speak through the sheer awe of what I was seeing. "What is this place?" I asked. Jesus looked at me, his eyes filled with more love than I could comprehend. "This," he said, "is what I have prepared for those who follow me with their whole heart." The words sank deeply into me, deeper than anything else I had ever heard. I had heard that this was not something earned, nor was it a reward for perfection or for those who had never failed. It was a gift for those who had placed their complete trust in Him, who had chosen Him above everything else. It was for those who hadn't just gone through the motions of faith, but who had genuinely surrendered themselves to God. I felt a deep yearning to be part of this, to join them and remain in this place where nothing was missing, where every desire was already fulfilled in God's presence. For the first time since my life had ended, I felt no attachment to what I had left behind. This was where I wanted to stay. This was where everyone was meant to be. But then something shifted. The peace didn't vanish, but a realization settled within me, one that weighed heavily, and I couldn't ignore it. I wasn't finished. My time here wasn't supposed to last. Before I could say anything, Jesus turned to me, his expression gentle yet firm. "You must go back," he said. The words felt like a sudden jolt, pulling me from the deep peace that had enveloped me. Go back? How could I leave this place? How could I possibly leave? Jesus must have noticed the hesitation on my face, because he placed his hand on my shoulder to steady me. "There are many who still do not know," he said. "They must hear, and you must tell them." A deep ache filled my chest. I didn't want to go. I wanted to remain here, to leave everything I had known behind. But I also understood that if I stayed, there would be people who would never hear what I had just witnessed. Even as my heart longed to stay, I knew what I had to do. I looked at Jesus, my soul torn between the desire for heaven and the responsibility he had placed upon me. I took a deep breath, though I had no lungs in this place, and with all that I had, I whispered, "I will go." The moment the words left my mouth, the light around me shifted again, and I felt something pulling me away. I was leaving heaven and returning to a world that had no idea of what I had just experienced. I stood there, surrounded by the beauty of heaven, feeling a peace so profound that it seemed to permeate every part of me. There was no fear, no burden, no pain, only a sense of belonging, as if I had finally arrived at the place I was always meant to be. I could have stayed there forever, letting go of everything I had left behind, knowing this place held no sorrow, no regrets, only perfect love and complete fulfillment. For the first time in my existence, I felt utterly whole. Then Jesus turned to me. His eyes were filled with something I couldn't fully name at first. There was love, unshakable, infinite love. But there was also expectation. "You have a choice," he said. His voice was steady, full of both tenderness and authority. The words sank deep into my heart, making it ache in a way I had never experienced before. I could stay. I could remain here, surrounded by peace, never to know pain or struggle again. I could let go of everything. The weight of the world, the worries, the suffering I had witnessed as a paramedic, the countless nights spent questioning why some lived while others died. If I stayed, I would finally be free of it all. Or I could return. I could go back to the world I had left behind, the same world full of distractions, where people chased things that didn't matter, where churches were filled with people who thought they knew God but never truly sought Him. I hesitated, the reality of what he was asking sinking in. If I went back, it would mean stepping into the same body, enduring the same pain, facing the same struggles. I would have to deal with people who wouldn't believe me, who would dismiss everything I had seen as nothing more than a dream or hallucination. Jesus knew my thoughts before I even spoke them. "Many will not believe you," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "Some will ignore you, but there are hearts that need to hear this." The weight of his words wrapped around me, pressing against my soul in a way that left no room for denial. If I stayed, the message would never be spoken. The truth he had shown me, the urgency of faith, the reality of heaven, and the call to live for him now and not later, would die with me. I looked at the people in heaven, those who had truly given their hearts to God, who had lived their lives fully surrendered to him. They had made their choice while still on earth. They hadn't waited for the perfect moment to seek him, and now they were here, exactly where they were meant to be. But what about those still in the world? What about the people I had treated as a paramedic, the ones I had saved physically but never thought to save spiritually? What about the ones I had seen in the vision Jesus had shown me? Those who thought they had time but never truly sought him. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by the responsibility placed before me. My chest ached, not from fear, but from the deep realization that if I refused, I would be choosing comfort over calling, silence over truth. I looked up at Jesus, my vision blurred with tears, my voice breaking as I whispered the only words that mattered. Lord, I will go. The moment I said it, something in Jesus' expression softened, and a peace deeper than anything I had ever felt radiated from him, filling every corner of my soul. It was as if he was pleased with my decision, as if he had known all along what I would choose. He stepped forward, placing his hand on my shoulder, steadying me in a love so strong that I knew, no matter what happened when I returned, I would never be the same again. "Then go," he said, "and tell them." The moment the words left his lips, everything around me shifted. The golden light, the warmth, the indescribable beauty of heaven began to pull away. I could feel myself being drawn back, pulled away from the place I had longed to stay forever. And then, before I could even process what was happening, before I could take one last moment to memorize the perfection of that place, I was gone. A sudden jolt ran through my body, like being pulled from the deepest sleep into a world that was too heavy, too loud, too full of pain. I gasped for air, my chest rising violently, my lungs burning as if I had been without breath for far too long. The weight of my body returned all at once, every ache, every sensation, every reminder that I was no longer in that place of perfect peace. The sounds around me were chaotic, voices shouting, machines beeping, hurried footsteps moving around the room. I could barely process what was happening, but then I heard someone say, "He's back. Oh my God, he's back." I opened my eyes, blinking against the harsh hospital lights. The world felt too dense, as if gravity had increased, pulling everything back into something I no longer belonged to. My limbs were heavy, my head pounded, but there was something even heavier inside me, the knowledge of where I had just been. A doctor leaned over me, his face a mix of shock and relief. "You had no pulse," he said, still in disbelief. "We tried everything, but you were gone. And now you're breathing, your heart is beating, like nothing ever happened." They called it a miracle, but I knew it wasn't just a miracle. I knew what had happened. I had stood before Jesus. I had seen heaven, and I had been given a message, a responsibility that now weighed so heavily on my soul that I could barely think of anything else. The days that followed were a blur. Doctors ran tests, unable to explain how I had come back. My body was battered from the crash, but I was alive. The medical explanations didn't matter to me. What mattered was the message I had to share. At first, I told my family. I sat them down, my hands still shaking, my voice hoarse as I told them everything. The crash, the moment I left my body, the presence of Jesus, the vision of the world, the warning, the urgency of faith, the choice he had given me. I watched their faces as I spoke, expressions shifting between disbelief and awe. Some cried, overwhelmed by what they were hearing. My mother clutched my hands tightly, tears rolling down her face, whispering, "I believe you." My sister sobbed quietly, shaking her head, saying she had always felt like something was missing in her faith, but never knew what. But not everyone believed me. I saw the hesitation in my brother's face, the way he avoided my eyes, the way he forced a polite smile and said, "Maybe it was just a dream. You went through a traumatic experience. The brain does strange things under stress." I didn't argue. I didn't need to argue. I knew the truth. I told my co-workers next. They had seen death up close, just like I had. They had spent years working alongside me, pulling people from wreckage, restarting stopped hearts, delivering the worst news to families who had prayed for a different outcome. They had seen the randomness of it all, the ones who survived against all odds, and the ones who slipped away despite our best efforts. So when I told them what had happened to me, some of them listened carefully. nodding slowly, as if something deep inside them resonated with my words. One of them, a man I had worked with for nearly a decade, broke down in front of me, telling me he had been struggling with his faith for years, and that hearing this story made him realize he needed to get right with God. But others dismissed it. "Sounds like oxygen deprivation to the brain," one of them said, shrugging as he took a sip of his coffee. "Near-death experiences are common. People see what they expect to see." I had expected that reaction, but I didn't stop sharing. I went to my church, stood in front of the congregation, and told them what Jesus had shown me. I told them that faith wasn't just about believing, but about truly following him, seeking him now instead of waiting for some perfect moment that might never come. Some sat in complete silence, their faces unreadable, their eyes locked on me as I spoke. Some were moved to tears, their heads bowed, their hands gripping the edges of their pews, as if something deep inside them had just woken up for the first time. Then there were the few who shifted uncomfortably in their seats, whispering among themselves, shaking their heads, convinced that I had simply been hallucinating, that what I was saying didn't fit neatly into their understanding of faith. But I didn't stop sharing, because I knew the truth now. I had seen what awaited those who truly gave their hearts to God, who didn't just claim faith, but lived it. I had also seen how many people were lost, not because they had outright rejected God, but because they believed they had time. That faith was something they could pursue later, when it was more convenient, when they had finished chasing their own plans. Jesus made it clear to me, faith is not just believing that God exists. It is not about going to church on Sundays out of obligation or saying a prayer when things get difficult, only to forget about him when life is good. True faith is about seeking him daily, making him the center of everything, knowing that every moment we are given is a gift that could be taken at any time. If I had not been given this second chance, my story would have ended that night in the ambulance. All the things I had put off, every opportunity I missed to tell someone about God, every time I pushed aside the thought of reading his word, every time I let distractions keep me from truly surrendering my life to him, would have remained undone. And so now I ask you, the person watching this, to truly consider the question that has been burning in my heart since the moment I returned. Are you living in faith, or are you waiting for someday? Are you actively seeking God, giving him your whole heart, or are you just assuming you have more time, because time is never promised? I have seen firsthand how quickly life can be taken, how unexpected death is, how many people step out of their homes in the morning thinking they will return, only for their lives to end in an instant. I was one of them. I didn't know that my life would change that night, that my heart would stop, that I would find myself standing before Jesus, being shown the truth about what truly matters. But you don't need to wait for a near-death experience to wake up. You don't need to go through what I did to realize that Jesus is calling you right now. He is not asking for part of you, for the moments when it's convenient, for the leftovers of your time and attention. He is asking for your whole heart. He is asking you to follow him now, to seek him now, to stop making excuses and truly live the life he created you for. Because one day you will stand before him, just as I did. And in that moment, the only thing that will matter is whether you truly knew him, whether you gave him everything, whether you followed him fully, not just in name, but in the way you lived. So I urge you, if this message has stirred something in you, do not ignore it. Do not push it aside and promise yourself that you'll think about it later. Later is never guaranteed. Seek God now. Live for him now. Make sure that when your time comes, whenever that may be, you are ready. Because I promise you, nothing else will matter in that moment. Thank you for watching. If this testimony spoke to you, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe so that more people can hear this truth and wake up before it's too late.